should I have?
Welcome to Media Path. I'm Louise Palanker.
And I'm Fritz Coleman.
Here at Media Path, we strive to explore and assess the vast expanse of media offerings using data gathering techniques more invasive than a Chinese spy balloon and less invasive than TikTok. In other words, we just sort of float around looking for stuff you may really enjoy until we're shot out of the sky. Plus, we bring you guests with their own fascinating media paths, such as legendary character, actor, writer, comedian Paul Dooley, known for his roles in Breaking Away, 16 Candles, and Popeye. Paul's new book is called Movie Dad. It will captivate you, break your heart, and then put it all back together again with love and wisdom. Paul joins us soon, but first, Fritz, what have you got for us?
Well, we have a couple of things worth mentioning this week. First, we continue making inroads into Northern Europe. There hasn't been an invasion of Northern Europe since D-Day. As Denmark is the latest country where MediaPath is charting on Apple Podcasts in the books category. We previously charted in Norway as well, so apparently we're huge in Scandinavia.
Oh, yeah.
We also continue to dominate the charts on Good Pods, including the top 100 of all time in politics for indie podcasts. At the time of the recording, we're number 28 on the top 100 books weekly chart. I mean, seriously, 28 in a bullet. That's what we're doing.
I'm very proud.
Thank you for your support. And wherever and whenever you're listening, and we love you for it. And finally, I'm just going to read a recent Apple podcast review. This is from Radio Boys, and the title is The Road Less Traveled. Listen to the Media Path podcast, taking listeners on the road less traveled and much more interesting. The research they must do for each show has to be extensive. Fritz and Wheezy make us laugh, smile, and sometimes want to research more. That's exactly what we like to do. Glad to subscribe. We would be overjoyed if you left us 5 stars and maybe a few kind words on Apple Podcasts. Do it in Danish if you must, and we'll read your review in the future.
In Google Translate.
I love that.
Yeah. Oh, and now, Fritz, you tell us what you've been watching this week.
All right, I'm going to talk about Poker Face.
Oh.
It's a new series on Peacock. All you need to know about this series is Natasha Lyonne. End of discussion. Poker Face is a 5-part Mystery of the Week series. That is, Natasha's character, Charlie Cale, solves a different mystery every week using her uncanny gift, which is her ability to look at somebody and know if they are lying. The producer, Ryan Johnson, openly admits this is a reboot of the 70s classic Columbo, but redesigned and fit in a streaming binging universe. Episode 4 just dropped. To give you a taste, in episode 1, Charlie's working as a cocktail waitress in a casino, and a close friend of hers gets murdered. Charlie uses her gifts to solve the crime, which has her butting heads with Benjamin Bratt, Adrian Brody, great little roles for that first episode. Every episode is a different plot with a different cast, with the only continuity being Natasha's character, Charlie, and that's a good thing, because when Natasha's on the screen, you cannot take your eyes off of her. Her raspy cigarettes and coffee voice, garnished with just the right amount of New York sarcasm, and you are hooked. Natasha got her momentum being a character on Orange is the New Black. She was also the creator, writer, and director of another successful streamer called Russian Doll. Again, episode 4 of the 5 is out this week. I believe she's working her way into major stardom.
It kind of reminds me of Benji, which I used to watch as a kid. Benji was a dog, and he'd go into these people's lives, and then he'd fix things, touch their hearts, and then off he'd go.
Yeah.
Benji.
That's a really good comparison.
That's very retro.
Oh, yeah. Benji was making a difference, sure. I've been watching The Bear on Hulu, Fritz. Have you watched The Bear?
No, I know the actor from Shameless. Yeah,
Exactly,
I love him.
yeah. So following the suicide death of his brother Mikey, fine dining master chef Carmi Berzatto comes home to run his family's sandwich shop, the original beef of Chicagoland. Here, personal and professional challenges abound as he faces the relentless pressure of restaurant ownership, a tightly wound, vocally belligerent staff, and devastating family relationships drowning in the wake of Mikey's drug addiction and death. The Bear is fast and noisy and urgent, and you may need to tap the volume down a notch or two when the ensemble gets into some intensely passionate differences of opinion. Mommy and Daddy aren't fighting. We're just discussing. But the show is packed with intensity and struggle and beauty and humor and cooking close-ups, if you are into that. And the first season leaves you with the resounding belief that throwing your entirety into something worthwhile is powerfully gratifying. Carmy, as Fritz just mentioned, is played by Jeremy Allen White, who you may know from Shameless. The cast is sensational. You can find The Bear on FX and on Hulu.
He's really a charismatic actor. I love that guy.
Yeah, no, he jumps off the screen. He's intense and captivating.
And I think he won a Golden Globe.
Oh, yeah?
Either that or a Critics' Choice Award, and his speech was very inspiring. Awesome.
Yeah, great actor. Let us introduce our guest. We're so excited.
I can't wait.
Paul Dooley's career spans 66 years and takes him from his hardscrabble West Virginia childhood to the groundbreaking Greenwich Village comedy scene of the 50s, to legendary TV commercials, to the Electric Company, and on to big screen stardom as America's favorite movie dad. Paul starred in Breaking Away, 16 Candles, Popeye, and he also starred in an impressive array of Robert Altman and Christopher Guest films. He was Sarge in the Cars movies. He has been a clown, a cartoonist, and he is a lifelong student of jokes. We are delighted to have you with us, Paul.
Hey, Paul.
How are you guys?
You're looking good.
Good. Can you tell us one of the first jokes you learned and loved as a child?
No, I can't.
Okay. And thank you for being here. That's our show for today.
I first started listening to radio when I was 12. My father bought a set. The first people I ever heard were Red Skelton, Jimmy Durante, and Jack Benny. But as a kid, I didn't get Jack Benny as much as I might. But Skelton was pretty much a clown. And Jimmy Durante was very funny. I do remember a joke that Jimmy Durante had a partner called Gary Moore, who served as a straight man. You remember Gary from a Gary Moore show years ago. So he was very educated, and Jimmy could barely read. And part of Jimmy's act was mispronouncing things. They had a hard time reading the scripts. He used to say, "What a catastrophe." And he called the microphone the microphony. And I remember one of the first jokes was Gary says, "Oh, you know, our band leader here on the show is very wealthy. He does lots of jobs outside the show. He does big dance parties and all kinds of things like that. So he does very well. He has a big home, a mansion. He has a mansion with 8 bedrooms, but there are no bathrooms." "No bathrooms," says Jimmy. He said, "That's right." And Jimmy says, "How uncanny." A dumb joke, but Jimmy Durante was well loved, as you know.
Well, you know, your book,
And, that's one of the first things I learned. I still remember, oddly, I have a kind of a quirk in my head where I remember everything I liked till now, and I'm 95 practically.
That's awesome.
It's just something that's, I'm not in charge of it, but if I like something funny, and I must know 10,000 jokes because I never forget anything I like.
That's a superpower. That's amazing.
Yeah, some kind of a thing. It's like a idiot savant in that way. You know, there's a certain thing like when Dustin Hoffman knew about math and numbers. You know, it's just something in my brain that's jokes. But I remember them a long, long time ago.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that.
So this book, which I loved, because it's like a history of show business. It's a history of the television era. You know, your interest started with the silence, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and it arcs all the way up through the present. It's really a great book. But I think it started as a one-man show, which you and I have in common. I did a few of those.
Yes, I did it at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. Then I moved it to another theater up here in the Valley on Ventura. And they're just 4 weeks of shows. And in the Fringe Festival, there was only 3 nights and it was gone. But a lot of people liked it. And I looked out in the front row opening night, and here's Dick Van Dyke. I'd never met Dick.
Oh, my.
Wow.
How did you even know about this cockamamie show?
Well, you both love... Yeah.
Yours forever. And he gave me a quote for the show, said, "I would watch you read the phone book." So he was a fan, and I was a fan of his.
Well, you probably had similar interests because he loved the silence too. He loved the big physical silent comics, Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah, in fact, Carl Reiner made a movie with Dick Van Dyke called The Comic, and he played a silent movie comedian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Mickey Rooney was in it playing a sidekick.
Wow.
Yeah,
So-
that was a long time ago. But I worked with Carl once, and I started reminiscing about those days. He said, yeah, we were supposed to go out for 3 days and shoot sample silent comedies, this 2 or 3 minutes long. But we loved it so much, we spent 2 weeks on location inventing silent movies.
Oh.
So we have a lot in common.
And you did that when you were a kid, right? You made your own movies?
Well, after I saw Keaton when I was 15, a friend of mine has come from a family with money. My family was poor. But when he first showed me these guys on his little 8mm screen in his room, he had an 8mm camera. We just went out and got top hats and canes and chased each other around town. We went to the oldest part of town, like near the waterfront on the Ohio River. And we really never had a plot. It was very much how they did it in the old days. They improvised silent movies. There was no dialogue. I'd chase him, he'd chase me, we'd fall down and get up. And so we continued this through high school and college. And we went to New York at the same time when we made movies there. I went out to Rockaway Beach and made one on the beach there. So I've always loved this stuff, and I wrote and directed the things. My friend appeared in it. He was like Max Swain was for Chaplin, one of those big guys.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I just I think I had a former life where I was in vaudeville, and somehow was in love with vaudeville. And why would I do that? It was no longer there. But then at 30 years after I first saw Keaton, I met him and did a commercial with him.
Yeah.
Yikes.
So that meeting your gods.
Seriously.
That was
You talked about your family being poor. Let's talk about your life in Parkersburg, West Virginia. I went to college in Salem and Clarksburg, West Virginia. I went to Salem College. It was a great bastion of underachievers, people who couldn't get into other colleges when they were out of high school. But and the only positive aspect of Clarksburg was that you could drink beer at 18 years old. That's really all I took away from it. But talk about it. You had a poor upbringing, and you made a really interesting comment in the book coming from marginal economic circumstances. You said the Depression really didn't affect your quality of life as a family because you were already poor.
And also my father built our own house, so we had no rent to pay. He was laid off from his job for 3 or 4 months and went back at half pay, which wasn't much to begin with. But he was a marvel because he left school in the 3rd grade. The teacher didn't know he needed glasses. He didn't know he needed glasses. The parents didn't know he needed glasses. So they just thought he was slow, which is code for stupid, sort of. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he had native intelligence, and he built from scratch his whole house, eventually 3 rooms, without ever asking for help from any other person he knew. And I still marvel at the way a guy with poor eyesight can measure a 1/4 of an inch and build a cabinet and make it plumb. Mm-hmm. But he did all this. I only knew years later when I discussed it with my therapist. He said, well, from what you talk about, he sounds like he was highly intelligent, but with no education. Mm. And I don't know many other people could do that.
Yeah. Now,
he dug the basement,
Oh, yeah. One room at a time, yeah. Now, you write in your book that your father never smiled. And I imagine that you, as a funny kid, kept looking into his face for that approval that wasn't there. So when you brought your father's personality to the dad and Breaking Away, you gave your version of this guy some humor and humanity, which I imagine was healing for you.
Well, he never had any humanity as such. He was very distant. Mm-hmm. I felt because he didn't have a father, his father left. I didn't think he knew how to be one. Mm-hmm. But he was not a mean man. He didn't discipline me or anything like that. He just spent his life working hard in a factory and at home. He kept on working on continuing to add on to the house. Mm-hmm. He didn't talk much. Never saw him hug my mother, kiss my mother, never hugged me. But when you're a kid, you only know your father,
Right.
not other fathers.
Right.
I thought that's what dads are.
Okay.
So if he never smiled, I didn't smile. If he didn't laugh, I didn't laugh. I bonded on him. I became someone like him. Then when I started doing films, I always played him.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them worked out very well. I just added humor to it sometimes, but I also was a grumpy dad many times.
Mm.
But that's what it is when you bond on someone.
You know, I learned so much. You are not afraid to share little wisdoms that you learned from your therapist throughout the book. And about your dad, one that I really resonated with was the fact that your therapist told you, because you were seeking approval with your dad, as I did with mine. I think that's why I went into the comedy business. But your therapist told you that you think more about the parent you're not getting enough from, or you think more about the parent that whose approval you seek and don't get. And I just thought, wow, that's so true. It's exactly right.
Absolutely. My mother was loving, fairly open. She had only a 7th grade education. So she was a good mother. I don't think they had a happy marriage because he was so not undemonstrative.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned it also in therapy. I was in therapy and also once a week group therapy. And I found in a group, the person who gets all the oxygen is the negative person who's the most disturbed. And the other people only have some slightly things wrong with them. They don't get any energy in the room because the guy who talks all the time and he's the most neurotic, he uses up the air. And that's almost like the parent you want to love you is the one that's not loving you. Mm-hmm. You pay more attention to the negative than you accept your mother, let's say.
I was so fascinated by that.
And
it's a kind of truism, I think.
And the great poignancy of your life is that while you were portraying these famous movie dads, your own children had been stolen from you.
That's right. And that, if there was ever an irony in anything, that's it. Mm-hmm. I became known as the go-to dad. I had 25 actors and actresses that I played the father of, including Julia Roberts and Molly Ringwald and Toni Collette and on and on and on. Sometimes I'd work 2 days in a film and be the father. Sometimes I'd work a month or two. Wimpy didn't have any children in Popeye.
That we know of.
That was a departure from the fathers, but I sort of got typed as being the dad, and I think the primary film that did that was 16 Candles. A lot of people, the producers said, well, let's get that guy in our film because he's a good dad.
But you had that scene written in because you weren't going to take the role, and you needed more, and
right.
Yeah.
John, you called up and said,
right.
I love you. I love Breaking Away. That was my most well-known film. And he said, I've written a new scene, which I hope will, have cause you to come and join us. And I read it, and it was a nice scene, and I did the film.
But it's kind of that scene that every teenage girl dreams or wishes that she had a dad that would see her the way she wants to be seen. The way as she's becoming a woman, that the way in which that she hopes that the world will see her as a lady, as a woman.
That's right. And I get mail all the time about that scene. Send me a picture, sign an autograph. And before the pandemic, I meet young women on the street who are now 30 or 35, and they grew up with that film and they just love it. So I had a fan base just through that one film.
Wow.
But it's that there's so many fathers that won't apologize for anything, mm-hmm. who won't say, I love you, and you're important to me, and I'd do anything for you. I think even fathers on their deathbed, and the daughter comes and says, I love you, Pop. It's the kind of a guy often who can't return that compliment. Because so many men are so defended, so afraid of showing emotion and weakness.
And it's the period. I had exactly that situation with my father. My father suffered a really bad heart attack, and he lived in Florida. And, I'm an only child, and I thought I was going to lose him. So he was like a third of my identity. So I went down to Florida, and I went in the door of the house after he got out of the hospital. I went to give him a hug, and it made him so uncomfortable. I said, I'm just giving you a hug to tell you I love you and I'm glad you're alive. He just didn't know what to say or do. He didn't know how to react to it. It was so outside of his experience. But
it scares the hell out of some men.
Yes, he was crusty on the outside, but inside he was mush. And I think he was the post World War II father, where businessmen had to be tough and all that. It was not only was it part of his character, it was what was expected of men at that time, not to show vulnerability.
Well, maybe you don't know you don't have the tools to manage your emotions, and you're just afraid that if it starts to come out, it will pour out, and you'll be a big mess. And go ahead, Paul.
A huge percentage of fathers never said "I love you" to their kids, especially boys. So my experience from my own father's being so far away from me made me go the other direction and show much more emotion and love and physicality and hugging and all that to my kids when I could.
Well, tell us about what happened with your kids and your marriage where you had those kids, and then one day you got a letter from their mom and they were gone.
I just disappeared. She says, I'm leaving, I'm taking the kids, we're not coming back. So naturally, that's shocking, but one can hardly really give it any credence because it's too impossible to imagine. So I struggled with it for a long time, and I finally had to accept that it was the truth. And after a year or so, I had some detectives looking at all that. I think I found out later they'd gone to Europe. But there was an underground into some of those countries like Denmark and Finland in that area, that women who had abusive husbands had taken underground route, go over there for a while to get away from bad fathers, bad husbands. But so I suffered through it and came out the other end. But after about a year of looking, I said to myself, I was in the book you looked at, what happens if I find them? I had gone to court and got custody, full custody, because of her breaking the marriage, breaking the divorce agreement. What happens if I find them? Do I tear them away from the only mother they'd ever known and traumatize them twice? Then we would probably hate me because the mothers are so much the caretaker. I said, I just have to sit back, stay in my own apartment, never leave, keep my phone number, and hope that they'll find me. But it took 10.
Yeah, as soon as they became adults, they found you almost instantly. And
18 years old.
And tell us a little bit about those conversations and what you learned about what their experience was and what they had been told.
Oddly, they didn't like to talk about their experience.
Okay.
As you'll imagine. To some extent, although they're glad to be free of living with their mother, there was a strange allegiance to her logic because she was their caretaker. And what she told them about me, and I never knew what she told me, they were reluctant to ever talk about it, even though it's been, they've been with me 20 or 25 years now. But I honored the fact that they didn't wish to talk about it. And I thought I was painted as a villain. But now we all have good relationships, but I've never spoken to her in all these years, 50 years or something. But we had to overcome things. And I believe there are things in the back of their mind. It's the propaganda they had against me. But they can't deny that I'm good to them. So I think they're still a little bit ambivalent.
And for them, it's a process as well. They're going to continue evolving, and they may have questions a year from now or something to say 2 years from now that they're not ready to say today.
That's right. I let it come up if it comes up, but I never push, because if they choose to put it in the past, it's okay by me.
I really...
We've been back together again for quite some time. My son lives here with me in Burbank.
Yeah.
Not with me, but nearby.
Yeah.
And the mother... and my daughter lives in Massachusetts, and she comes out to visit.
I was stricken by your humanity, and you just mentioned another reason why, and that is how you were so empathetic of how your daughters were feeling. It wasn't about you. Finally, you're getting your daughters back. You were worried about them and not pushing too hard on what their experiences were and letting them speak at their own pace and time with that. But also, the first time you got married, you had gotten a girl pregnant, and you wanted to do the right thing, and so you married her. She lost, and you wanted to give the child a name, as you said, and you also wanted to avoid death by her father, and so you married her, and then she lost the baby, but you stayed with her, and you thought you would give it a go, even though you had never even dated this woman one time. You thought you would give her the benefit of the doubt and give it a try. And I thought, wow, you have a very strong moral center. I really that touched me.
Well, I felt that we didn't know if we were in love with each other. Having sex doesn't mean you're in love with somebody.
Oh,
we hadn't even known each other that well. We just
wait, what?
Anyway, we talked it over. I married her to save face for her family, who were Sicilian, by the way.
Oh, boy.
And between us, I said, let's just stay together through college. We'll live together. And if we choose to, when we leave here, because we both wanted to go to New York, we'll just stay together or we'll not stay together. But she agreed to that. We lived a very nice married life through most of college. And in fact, we did separate when we got to New York. And the funny thing is, the first night, you know how scary New York can be for an out-of-towner. The first afternoon when she got her little hotel near Times Square and I got in the YMCA, within hours we realized we were left alone and the only people we knew in New York were each other. And we quickly wanted to spend time together because it was too scary not to. So we were always friendly and briefly got together again and lived in a way where we were fond of each other and got along without really being committed. But she had a big career and I began to have a career, and mine were mostly from commercials. I was a white wasp, the guy who could buy the product, sell the product, tell his neighbors about the product.
But I think you were maybe that guy that walked into the audition and showed them something even beyond what they had written with your ability. And so talk about some of that, because you kind of like set the template for, how things were going to be sold to post-war housewives in the suburbs.
What I discovered is that big ad agency, J. Walter Thompson was one of the biggest. They would have tons of products, and each product would have a team of art director, producer, copywriter. And they didn't like if you changed the copy at all, but I could also see where I could change the words and make it amusing. But the writer in the room doesn't want to hear that. He wants to hear the words he wrote. Of course, he's been hearing them for the last 2 days from other actors. Mm-hmm. So I used to try to find a way to be funny before the audition and after the audition. And then they have a bunch of pictures on the table and say, who do we like? Well, who's the guy that went in the closet? Yeah, I like him. But that wasn't from the way I read the copy or I read the script. It was because I showed them I had humor. And in this particular advertising agency, there was a door to the hallway, and next to it, like as a L-shaped thing, was a door to a closet. One day I'm backing out of the room and trying to win them over on my way out, saying, well, good luck with this. It's a very good commercial. I hope to see you again. And I accidentally took the closet door and opened it. Then they all laughed. And I extended the laugh as far as possible. Then they closed it and left. Then every time I went there again, it was a new copywriter, a new director, new producer. They didn't know I'd done that, but I used to do it every time. The casting and sometimes I worked it out to a kind of art. I would go in the closet door, and I'd open the closet door and go inside and stay there. Or they'd start laughing. And the more you stay there, the more they'll laugh. But then I'd come out and do a couple of takes and leave. But I almost never didn't use that closet. So you're going to say, well, the guy was pretty funny with the closet. And compared to other guys who didn't do any of that, they just, even the copy, even the words weren't funny or anything. But if they remember you, if you amuse them, I had to be an improviser already.
Oh, yeah.
Ability and improvising ability.
And the likability. I want to hear about you doing sketches on Ed Sullivan and shows of that nature. That sounds really scary and interesting to me.
I did stand up for a while and did the Tonight Show in 1959 with Jack Parr.
Stop right there. Stop right there.
Yeah.
Because I don't want you to go too far without me saying something.
Okay.
That gives me, I put you on a pedestal because you did something on the Jack Parr show that I don't think has ever been done in stand-up comedy before. You went on that show and did a piece of material you had never done before.
That's right.
I get heart palpitations just thinking about that. How did that come about?
The average comedian used to say about the Tonight Show, you go on the road, and it takes about 7 years to know what you're doing and have a great 6 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's impossible to imagine going on that show and really not having done it in front of human beings. I sort of knew where the punchlines were, but I was very nervous, but did enjoy it. It was a weird premise. A 5-year-old president of the United States and how he would behave. And it worked very well. They asked me back, and you may know from the book I didn't have any more material.
Yep.
So I met Alda on the street, and we knew each other slightly. I said, could you help me write? They asked me to come back in 2 weeks. Sure, I said. Then I was going crazy trying to think, I don't have a good 6 minutes. I met Alan, and he's a good writer. I knew he was a writer. And I said, you'd help me write a monologue. I have 2 weeks for the Tonight Show. We did it together, and it worked. Forget my phone. I have a landline. But anyway, Alan is a good friend and one of the nicest people I ever met.
Yeah, he is. We'll wait.
So that was the story of that show.
We'll wait until your phone stops talking to you. But what about the sketches? Because you never know how that's going to play. Yeah. You know, you're far removed from a studio audience. The laughs are different than they would be in a club.
Well, sketch work I learned primarily in Second City, mm-hmm. where, you do routines. They're not a minute long. They're maybe 3 or 4 minutes. And what you try to do in an improv is to do a beginning, middle, and end, even though you're improvising. Mm-hmm. But I learned from other writers and from watching comedians. I sort of taught myself how jokes work, Fritz knows that one of the old rules is 1, 2, 3, and 3 is the punchline. It's a trio. There's something magical about it. There's the Three Stooges. There's the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. And there's in all of literature and mythology, there's always this 3 little pigs. There's something about it that's not just the number 3. Mm-hmm. It's magical in some way, which I can't explain. But it's all over comedy. You do 1, 2 things and change up for the end, and it's funny.
It's kind of like 2 creates the pattern, and then 3 is the twist.
Exactly. When I was in college, I was supposed to write a thesis in my senior year, and I asked that my teacher, advisor, who was also head of the drama department, I said, instead of writing a thesis, can I do an in-person speech for my thesis? He said, I don't know. What's it about? I said, my theory of comedy. And I didn't know anything about New York comedians or New York writers, but I knew enough to know what made a simple joke. And so I said exactly what you said. You create a pattern, and the audience is led along with the pattern and begin to expect the pattern to continue. And when you twist it, that's the laugh, that's the joke. 1, 2, change.
Yeah.
And it's very magical, that thing.
It is.
Everybody who writes or does comedy know about it.
Even though we know it's coming, we're excited. It's sort of like playing peekaboo with a baby. The baby gets to know you're gonna reveal your face, and he's still super excited when you do.
Absolutely. And oddly enough, you don't need step 2. That's just to make 3 work. Uh-huh. Two guys going to bar. One says this, one says that. Very similar things. The other guy says, the other guy twists it around and it works.
Yeah.
So early in your career, you went to West Virginia University in Morgantown, and one of your classmates was Don Knotts.
Yeah.
And talk about him in the early days. And did you have a sense that this guy was so different and interesting and funny? You guys, this made me laugh, although there was not 2 lines before it. you guys used to go to strip clubs, but not to watch the strippers, to watch the comedy.
Yeah, it was called burlesque, and it was in Pittsburgh, West Virginia University, right at the north, right at the edge of the West Virginia. So in short drive, you're in Pittsburgh. We didn't call it a strip club. We called it burlesque. But we actually find them kind of boring because, you know, they were not nearly as sexy as women are today dancing. They just did a few little moves and left, you know. They took off very little. But Don and I weren't interested in that. Here's these guys doing these great sketches. So we relearned them on the way home. What I didn't remember, he remembered. And we couldn't do it. They were bawdy, so you couldn't do it for anybody else. We would go to do it free in fraternities. And compared to today, they were not bawdy at all. Today is filthy now, frankly, in terms of sex and jokes and language. But we'd use these sketches and be able to do burlesque, but just for fraternities. But Don had done 3 years of college, then was drafted and did 2 years in the Army, and they put him in special services, which means he could entertain the troops because he had been a boy ventriloquist when he was 13. I saw the dummy he used to work with. And so he got, for 2 years, he got to be paid, never carried a gun, never dug a foxhole, just in America. He went around all the places and learned from the troops. And you can do comedy every day, not now and then to have a booking, but every day it's your job to be funny. He came home, he was a polished comedian. I remember Don always had a frail look. He had a little caved in chest, a little hump back. And he used to talk about that. He said, my doctor told me I'd have to go to Arizona for my lungs. I thought I was all in one piece. I didn't realize it. And then he said, but I have a good doctor. He's very nice. He's near me. He lives just a gallstone's throw away.
We had his daughter on who wrote a great book about being his daughter, and she was cute, Karen.
Oh, yeah. And he's a very sweet man.
Yeah.
And then another routine he did was a double talk kind of thing I'd never heard before or since. And he says, here we are at the big football game. And the sun is shining on the spectators' faces, and everything was one of those loops, you know, it's like a malapropism, but just turning words. He said, the player's down. He's running on the 20-yard line, the 30-yard line, the 40-yard line, and he's tackled on the dirty clothesline.
Were you there when he got
onto the field?
Were you there when he got added to the Steve Allen show? Because I used to love it when he would come on because he was.
I had gone to New York by the time, and when people really knew him from the Steve Allen show. And every week he'd cut to him and he'd say, "Are you nervous?" And Don looked nervous, and he'd say, "No." Remember that?
Yeah.
Yep. And he had Tom Poston with one of the others. Very funny stuff. And, Steve Allen laughed at all the comedians. Yeah. He was great.
When you were kind of working your way through to create a career for yourself, it seems like there's a long period of not really knowing where to step next. And then all of a sudden things start clicking for you. Like, when did you realize, like, I think I'm as good as anyone, and I think I'm going to be able to make a go of this?
Well, I was making $3,000 a year for 9 years, which included being in the Three Penny Opera, very well received. It ran 7 years in New York, but I left to go to do a show up in the upstate New York where they were famous for reviews and sketches, which is where I met Carol Burnett when she was 21.
Awesome.
And so I kept looking for areas in plays, but mainly in places where I could do comedy or something like sketches. Not stand-up, but just sketches. So every summer I try to find a summer theater where I could do something like that. There's a place called Tamament where Sid Caesar and his gang cut their teeth. Another place was where Danny Kaye started. Only 2 or 3 people in the mountains, not Catskills, but a place devoted to sketches and variety shows. That was a great training ground for me. I always seem to want to do that short form comedy, which is those sketches that are 3, 4, 5 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with Carol when she was just starting out, but everyone in the company said, that girl's going to be a star. Just meeting her even.
Oh, yeah.
And her acting.
Yeah.
But I learned something interesting reading about your experience with Three Penny Opera, because there were a couple other famous people that did that show as well that came with you to that show from off-Broadway.
John Astin.
John Astin from the Addams Family was great. But I learned something really interesting. You know, that show gave birth to Mac the Knife, the song Mac the Knife.
Yeah.
And the lady Lottie Lenya in that show is an actual person.
Maybe they're all people. Maybe all the people in those lyrics are.
I thought that was she a character in that play? She was a real
Lottie
woman.
Lenya is Kurt Weill's wife.
Yeah.
Oh.
And Kurt Weill is the composer. The only reason you know that she's Lottie Lenya is I think Bobby Darin or someone like him threw her name into it.
Oh.
And he was naming these prostitutes.
Oh.
Jenny Diver.
Lucy Brown.
Three of these prostitutes. But in the record, he said Lottie Lenya. But she wasn't a prostitute in the show. She was Kurt Weill's wife.
Wow. It's like...
I think Bobby Darin put that name out there.
It was like a revenge porn song.
Very well known in Europe. She made a film of Three Penny Opera. Even that was based on a beggar's opera from England, but it was Kurt Weill's version of it. And she did it on film, and then she did it on stage, and we did it on film, and then she came to New York, and she might have been 25 when she played it the first time, and the second time she's 30, and now she's 40, and she comes to New York and plays the same role.
Right.
As one of Mac the Knife's lovers.
We want to hear about, Paul, we want to really hear about The Odd Couple, because your experience with Walter Matthau was not altogether pleasant.
No. Well, there's some actors who are selfish on stage, and the better actors and most actors are just generous. And they know a fellow actor. They don't try to steal the focus, you know. But he had a habit of, there's a thing called upstaging. Mm-hmm. If you go farther back upstage, forces the actor downstage near the audience to turn and look upstage. Therefore, you see the back of his head. It's a common trick that selfish actors do. So he did that. But when I worked with him, I did it one-on-one with him. He moved upstage, I moved upstage. Pretty soon we're at the back wall. You're going to have to stop that nonsense. That's the way of stealing the focus.
But you kind of took him on, whereas Art Carney just stopped showing up, and then you got the role.
Well, Art's a very shy guy, and he never liked. There was a book written about him that it was an approved biography, and he said I didn't like Walter Matthau from the first day because Walter is a show off, and Art just really likes to go hide in the woodwork. You know, he's humble, and it's amazing when you think of him working on The Honeymooners. He didn't seem shy at all, but as a person, he just was withdrawn, and he didn't want to have any hassles. He would never call him on his misbehavior. Well, finally, I took over and played Art Carney's role and co-star with Matthau. Then I started telling him off. He didn't like it, but
he used to break the fourth wall, which is a verboten in theater, and even Mike Nichols, the director, tried to stop him, and he wouldn't stop.
He always did this thing he's not supposed to. See, if you break the fourth wall in a certain show, it becomes part of the style of the show. Every musical breaks the fourth wall to sing songs. Mm-hmm. But normally in a play, you don't break the fourth wall because sometimes that's meant to be a landscape, a lake, another wall with pictures on it or a mirror. It's understood by the audience. If you do it several times in a play, it's the style of the play. But if you do it once, it stands out like, what the hell is that? So he broke the fourth wall. They get a big laugh when you do that. But Mike Nichols told him in rehearsal, it's very funny, Walter, but you get a big laugh. It's a cheap laugh. And then we don't get them back for another 5 or 10 minutes because we broke the rules with them. The play didn't have that until that moment. Mm-hmm. And he said, don't do it again. So for 6 weeks out of town, he got the same note every day, and every day he begged off and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mike, it slipped out." And then he'd say, once he said, maybe I'm not a good enough actor to do that line. And it was all bullshit, He just would not give up that joke.
Wow.
The joke is he's supposed to look at heaven and speak to God. Mm-hmm. Why doesn't he hear me? I know I'm talking. I recognize my voice. But he's talked to the fat lady in the front row. And it was more funny. And it was funny, but it's not right for the play. Yeah. So after getting that note all those times, Mike would keep changing it in a way to make it funny, and finally it was just reduced to like the last day before we opened in New York. He said, "Well, we have nothing to do. We were a big hit in Washington. We got rave reviews. Let's just do exits and entrances in case the stage now has one step up and one step down. Just go in and out the doors with no acting." This is so I have no notes for you. Oh, Walter, I had an idea. He says, the line, "I recognize my own voice." Instead of doing it to God, why don't you pick out a fat lady in the front row and say it to them? I think you get a big laugh. It's his way of saying "screw you."
Yeah.
Wow.
Because he never listened to him, and he never would.
I was really
doing it.
I was really envious of you getting to work with two of my idols, Mike Nichols, because you immediately respect his comedy notes, I'm sure, because nobody funnier. And also Neil Simon, to me, is one of the greatest writers in the history of Broadway. It must have been, as a comedian that you were, it must have been really a treat to be able to say his words.
Oh, that show was more fun than anything you can imagine, because somehow Neil Simon writes it so the straight lines, the setup lines are all so funny.
Yeah.
Because it's written in the rhythm, Mm-hmm. He's the king of rhythm. He wrote as many plays as Shakespeare, I think. Mm-hmm. And in England, they used to often call him, he's the Shakespeare of our current time.
He had 4 shows on Broadway simultaneously at one time, which is unbelievable.
One was The Odd Couple.
Yeah.
The other one was Barefoot in the Park. Mm-hmm. Another one was off Broadway, and he kept winning Tonys. There were 4 plays running at the same time, and Barefoot in the Park was one, and the next one was Odd Couple. And I forget the names. There was one called The Knack, an off-Broadway show. But he won prizes for everything. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you something.
Yeah.
He once said to me, he's very funny, but it doesn't mean he tries to be funny in every moment, in everyday life. Mm-hmm. Sometimes. But he said 2 things to me where I thought were brilliant. We're walking along the street, and we see a storefront. It's one of the kind that tells you what's in there by a piece of paper scotch taped in the thing. It's almost like going at a sale, little storefront. Mm-hmm. And it had a piece of paper there, scotch taped up. It says, "Kate Jurado." No, it said karate judo. And he said, didn't she marry Ernest Borgnine? And Ernest, Kate Jurado, karate judo.
Hilarious. Tell your Lin Manuel story when you're backstage with Winnie, because I love this story.
Well, it used to be you went to the dressing rooms at the Stars. A few years back, 6 or 8 years back, they started doing it another way. People would love the actor would complain they have to go 4 flights up, the dressing room. So you gathered on stage, all the fans that came backstage, maybe there's 8 or 10 or 12 or 15, and they're all just mingling, and your star's there, so you talk to that one. So my wife was talking to Lin Manuel, who she had known through Stephen Schwartz, with whom she wrote Wicked. Mm-hmm. So she knew him socially a little bit. So I'm standing off in the back because, I'm going to intrude to their conversation. Then he comes over and he sees me over in the background. He says, "Oh, my God, Paul Dooley." She said, "Yeah, it's my husband." "Oh, geez, I didn't know that." So now we're talking, and he's very complimentary about me, and I am about him. Then he said, "Well, I got some friends there. I have to say goodbye." And he goes to another place. Then he says in parting, "Paul Dooley, you've made my day." And as we left, my wife said, he got something like 12 Tony nominations that day, but he made his day.
Yeah. You made his day.
Wow.
In what way?
That's beautiful.
But he's the nicest guy in the world.
Wow, what a gifted man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I I loved, because you became a clown as, I guess, a part-time job later in your life.
I couldn't join SAG, Equity, or AFTRA, the unions. So I had to make a living. I did children's theater. And the lady who hired us paid 5 actors $5 a performance and charged $100 to the school for having written it or adapted it. And I said, well, I have a few skills. I can do magic and juggling. And in college, I'd done a little clowning around. So I put together a show, could sell for $45 for an hour, got a partner who would be my straight man, and I stretched it out to making an hour show. And you can't stretch a magic act out that long or clown. It needs some help, so he'd play the guitar and sing a song. Mm-hmm. But the kids never liked that much because he was okay, but he was not really funny or anything. But I learned from doing children's theater that the kids would often be bored with the play, sitting still. They're 7, 8, 9, whatever it is. And they don't only perk their ears up when they saw actor A sneaking up on actor B. Mm-hmm. Then that made their day. Look out, or they'd laugh. And then the actor could stretch that out, especially this actor, milking it, they call. So when the kid said, look behind you, I wouldn't look behind me, I'd look over there, and then he'd be over here. And then everywhere I went, he wasn't there, and we worked it out together. Then I used to shake the curtain and they knew something was up, but that's the first. And then I would open the centerfold curtain and stick out my hand with a white glove on it and wave at them. I was just milking it by degree in small increments. And then I would open the curtain and go like this. And then before that, I would put my foot out with a big shoe so that you build up to it. And he's not aware of it, apparently. He's not supposed to be.
It's like between you and the kids.
Turn around. He goes left to look for me, and I'll go there and peek out and wave. I can't believe I stretched it out with like 10 different little things. Then I got an idea. My big foot came out, my big shoe. And I got an idea, and I got a broom handle and took off the broom part and put the big shoe attached with glue. So the second time I put my foot out, I took the broom handle and raised it up about 8 feet. And it looks like my body went with it. They saw. Now the shoe goes whoop, up about 8 feet in the centerfold. And they loved that. So I got about 6 or 8 minutes out of all that stuff, just doing mime of sneaking up.
And let's talk about mime and talk about being able to entertain kids without using words. Your favorite performers and the pivotal performers in your life were the silents. Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, not so much Harold Lloyd, but W.C. Fields, who's one of my favorites. And these people...
Harry Lang, the less-known comedian, but he's also fun.
Yes. And you learned how universal the physicality of comedy can be, even if you don't know the language, and use that in your later work, being able to communicate with your body as well as your mouth.
Yeah. I love that idea. I'll tell you a little quick anecdote. Barbara Harris was a very insecure actor, but one of the most famous improvisers in Second City. But she was very insecure, so sometimes she wouldn't follow the rules of improv, which are listen and agree, always agree with your partner. Mm-hmm. Never have an argument on improv. You just help each other build a scene. Listen and agree. So we appeared on stage. We said to the audience, who are we? Give us our characters. They said, all right, you're the wife and you be the husband. I said, anything special about us? Well, she works, you stay at home. Okay, she left the stage. I thought she'll make an entrance in a minute. I went over in pantomime, turned on the faucets, washed my hands, turned off the faucets, got a towel, dried my hands. She didn't come in. I got a mixing bowl. I broke some eggs in it, and she still didn't come in. And I'm making mixing the eggs like that, because I love mime, and I was delighted I could just keep going forever. And did a lot of stuff, all the mime stuff I could, looking in cabinets below. But finally, I decided I'd pour these eggs into a skillet, turn on the gas, I could have gone forever. I love mime. And so now I'm at the stove, and I apparently have the eggs in the skillet, and I'm making this kind of move that you might make to keep the eggs from sticking to the pan. Mm-hmm. Finally, she comes on stage. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I thought I'd scramble some eggs." And she said, "In a tennis racket?" Now, the audience laughs because they're surprised, but that's not what you do in Second City. You make it hard. Not only pull the rug out from the other actor, you pull the rug out from the audience's sensibilities.
That's a Walter Matthau moment.
Yeah, that is a Walter Matthau moment, but funny.
Yeah. In other words, if you open a cabinet, they'll believe you if you believe you, and they go along with it. They enjoy doing it. So just because I'm an improviser and didn't want to look foolish with her stupid laugh, when she said in a tennis racket, I said, "No wonder the eggs are falling into the fire."
There you go.
That was just save my ass and get a maybe bigger laugh.
Well, you gave her a yes and.
What one of the things that I just love to talk to performers about who are of that era are the people that cut their teeth in the Village. And you as a comic got to work upstairs at the Duplex with people like George Segal and Woody Allen and Joan Rivers. Just paint me a picture of that environment. It just seems like, wow, what a great time to be starting.
Nowadays, when you get a shot in a comedy club, you're sometimes given 15 minutes. But then she'd have about 8 people on the bill, and Jan Wallman was her name, the hostess, and she would say, "You each have 5 minutes." Well, Woody Allen was there, and his manager, Jack Rollins, told Woody, said, "You have to be a performer." He said, "I don't want to perform. I'd be too nervous up there." You can tell by his style. He's been nervous. He's insecure. That's his picture of himself. And he said, "Here's the thing. When you read me what you wrote in my office, it's hilarious. But if I hand that to some other comic without your style, without your voice, without your look, it's not funny when he does it. It's only funny when you do it." So he convinced him he should try to be an actor. You may even get to be in shows all by yourself, maybe a play, maybe a film. And he was a very smart, the most famous manager in New York, because he had Mike and Elaine, and Dick Cavity always had the greatest taste. So I was backstage once when Woody was on the bill, and there's a running order. There are 8 performers, and George Segal was there playing a banjo. And Peter Bonerz was there doing pantomime, and Joan Rivers was there doing 5 minutes. But Woody would go to somebody and say, "Where are you on the rundown?" And I said, "I think I'm on 3rd, I'm next." And he'd say, "Oh, I don't want to go on. I'm 4th, but I don't want to be there." He said, and he goes to someone else, "Where are you?" "Come on 7th. And he said, "Yeah, I'm supposed to be. Would you trade?" Pretty soon he pushes himself out till he only comes on at the last performer because he don't want to go on at all.
Wow.
I remember one joke from that time. He said, Norman Mailer wrote this book. I think it's Norman Mailer, but it was called The White Negro. And I saw it. I had a dream that night. It's the only joke I remember from Woody Allen from those years ago. He said, "I had a dream last night. And I dreamed I was this white Negro. But unfortunately, I was this redheaded, freckled, insecure Jew." So it didn't work out too well. So he made it a picture of who he, even more better words that, but that's part of it. Redheaded, freckled, insecure Jew.
What a time. You also worked at Village Vanguard?
I was a maitre d', and I got to be there. $5 a night, I'd tell people to sit over there. Maitre d' is a fancy name for, say, there's your table. It's in the basement. Very famous club. It's still there, and it's over 100 years old. It began as a folk room, just folk stuff in the Village. But I got to see Mike and Elaine their first night in New York.
Yikes.
because Jack Rollins, their manager, brought them there to look at them. He'd only heard about them. They left the improvisation in Chicago, went down to St. Louis and tried something as a team. He heard about them. He brought them to New York and showed them off at the Village Vanguard. But my friends would say, "You mean you can watch Miles Davis and Coltrane and all these famous musicians, all of them, Thelonious Monk, for free?" I said, "No, I get to see Lenny Bruce and Orson Bean and Professor Irwin Corey for free. And I saw this team go Mike and Elaine the other night for free." And they couldn't believe it, but they were all looking to Miles Davis,
Wow.
Miles didn't like white people, and I can understand why. Yeah. And he did his act. He did his act with his back to the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That Coltrane, they would all sort of turn away from the audience. Thelonious Monk would be at the piano, but piano set in a circle. He didn't see the audience. They didn't mind being observed, but they're not going to play it for.
Or Walter Matthau was upstaging them. So what do you hope
Walter Matthau's upstaging God right now.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you hope that folks get from your book?
I like the idea. That my story and its ins and outs, and there's so many different things that people used to say, "You've got a really interesting life. Why don't you write a book?" Mm-hmm. And I said, if I wrote a book, I wouldn't be there when they laughed at it, because I would want to write a funny book.
Good point.
So I did a one-man show, and in the pandemic, I said, maybe I'll just expand the one-man show into a book. But I didn't know for 6 months if I could find a publisher. Who am I? Not a known author. But then a friend of mine told me about Applause Books, who specialize in show business, theater, film, and all that. And that's who published it. But I just did it to keep busy in the pandemic,
Yeah.
But I thought sharing the kind of different things I did in one career, First, I was a hit in commercials for about 15 years. I didn't need film or television or anything. Then I met Robert Altman and then got into films. Mm-hmm. Then anybody who knew me on the West Coast would think of me as a film actor. He gave me, the license to be a known actor in films, which I'd never done before. So once I did that, other people would hire me, and Breakaway is the best movie I ever made. And that also gave me a good place in the business. People who loved that film would then hire me to do other things. But I've been a dad in almost everything. But I'm sharing the idea of going so many ways, loving vaudeville, Buster Keaton. And I studied vaudeville even though I was never alive for it.
I mean, you're a man who's taken your collection of talents and gifts and sort of packaged them, and you're also very fluid. You can go and do and be what's necessary, in your life, and that's a gift as well. Is knowing how to improvise with what life throws at you.
And you're also a talented artist. You could have easily gone on to have a career as a...
I wanted to be a cartoonist first.
Right.
And then I learned to juggle. Then I wanted to learn how to juggle funny.
How do you juggle funny?
I wanted to do magic funny.
Yeah, so you had your...
The funny thing is when I started doing films, very often, I've done more dramatic roles in film than I have comedy roles. And the only real stretch of me is playing Wimpy and Popeye because Jules Pfeiffer wanted me to play that part.
Don't you feel, though, that comics can play serious, but serious can't play funny if they're not funny?
You're absolutely right. There's an old line that says, dying is hard. What is it? What is the line about?
Oh, yeah.
Dying is easy, comedy is hard.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Comedy's harder than drama, but people don't think so. The people who hand out prizes in Hollywood don't think that.
Right.
You rarely get an Oscar for a comedy role.
No,
right.
You're right.
Jack Lemmon had to play a drunk to get a comedy role.
Right. But you and Carol Burnett have shown us that, funny people can be very, very effective with dramatic scripts.
Well, actually, there's a lot of skills involved with comedy.
Yeah.
And you can utilize that in dramatics, too. The first movie I did was called Wedding for Robert Altman, but I went into it kicking and screaming because it was kind of a straight role, father of the bride, who was a cranky kind of guy. Then the first time I saw dailies, and Altman was famous for letting his actors see the dailies. Mm-hmm. Most directors won't. They don't want you to be there listening to what they talk about you. They're saying, look how big her nose looked. Can't you change the light? They want to be, they're sitting next to them is the lighting guy, the DP, or maybe somebody from wardrobe, but they're the guys that hang around the director. He wants to be free to say things, you know. Can't you light her so we don't see how big her nose is, you know?
Right.
Or do this, we don't want to see her double chin.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
And they don't want the actress to hear all this, but Bob didn't care.
I don't want to go to the dailies. I'm good.
Yeah. Robert Altman, he let everybody come, and it was a big festival. Yeah. We all loved it.
Wow.
He also brought actors in on the first day of the picture and didn't let them go home until the last day of the picture. Whereas if you have 3 scenes, you come in, shoot them out, then you can go home. They don't have to pay you per diem and salary. But he wanted everybody to stay throughout the movie. I said, why is that, Bob? He says, I don't know. Maybe I want to put you in the scene at the end, but you're gone. So he liked you hanging out on the set.
Right.
And often he would utilize you.
So he saw it as a company, family, that we do this together. All right, well, we're gonna wrap up today. I just want to highly recommend this book. It's a beautiful book. The pandemic is almost worth it to get this book out of you, Paul, because wow, you have so much to share. There's just so much beauty in your story and so much to learn. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us and for writing the book. The book is called Movie Dad by Paul Dooley. And I'm going to read. And
it can be found on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Yep, and at PaulDooleyActor.com, I believe, is the website. Fritz, we don't have a sponsor yet, Paul. So what we do is we kind of give a shout out to some of our favorite charities so we can help people help people. Go ahead, Fritz.
All right, well, thank you. Anybody who lives in Southern California would love to know what they could do to help with the homeless crisis. It affects every neighborhood, every walk of life. And you can help, I'm here to tell you. I'd love you to Google Shelter Partnership or go to shelterpartnership.org. I've been involved with them for 30 years.
I'm going to write that down.
I appreciate it. They are an organization that was designed to work throughout Los Angeles County to help develop housing and resources for the homeless. We operate the S-Mark Caper Forum Resource Bank. It's a huge warehouse where we take in large donations of non-perishable goods and distribute them to over 250 homeless shelters in the LA area. For instance, a major corporation like Procter & Gamble may have pallets of products that they donate, which are perfectly viable products. They just are overstocked or they're outdated packaging, and they might have 5 or 6 pallets of diapers or toiletries or other basic necessities, hundreds, maybe thousands of individual items. They deliver them to our warehouse. We distribute them to homeless facilities throughout Southern California. You can learn more about us, or more importantly, make a donation to help us continue our work at shelterpartnership.org. Thank you very much.
And here are your closing credits. Thank you so much for joining us. We would love to continue this conversation with you on Instagram and Twitter, where we are at MediaPathPod, and on Facebook, where our show page is MediaPath Podcast, and our Facebook group is called MediaPath with Fritz and Wheezy Podcast Community. You can find full video podcast episodes loaded with bonus visual content on our YouTube channel, MediaPath Podcast. You can write to us at MediaPathPodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy this show, please give us a nice rating on Apple Podcasts and talk about us favorably, if you would, on social media. You can sign up for our saucy rag of a newsletter at MediaPathPodcast.com. And we want to thank our wonderful guest, Paul Dooley. Our team includes Dina Friedman, John Maddox, Sharon Bellio, Bill Filipiak, Thomas Hubble, Mason Brown, Garrett Arch, and you. Our theme music is by me and John Maddox. I'm Louise Palanker here with Fritz Coleman and Paul Dooley. Be well and wise, and we will see you along the media path. And Thomas is going to tell you exactly when to smile.